Mark Gurman has just confirmed that Apple had the Mac Pro ready months ago, but they ultimately scrapped it. And if you're wondering why the heck they would do that, I think I have figured it out. I put a bunch of puzzle pieces together, which I'm gonna talk about in this video. But not only that, I'm also gonna talk about some exclusive leaks, some new leaks about the M2 Extreme Mac Pro and when exactly that is going to be coming out. So let's get started. Now, if you didn't already know, I had an exclusive interview with Mark Gurman the other day where we discussed a bunch of different topics. And by the way, we're at 999,000 subscribers, so just please click that button to help us reach 1 million. But if you didn't see that interview, definitely check it out on our channel because we talked about the Mac Pro. And once again, Mark Gurman said that Apple had the M1 based Mac Pro ready to ship months ago, but it was ultimately scrapped. And now they're deciding to go with the M2 Extreme Mac Pro, which is the next family based on the M2 chip. And yes, Mark Gurman has talked about the M2 Extreme chip earlier this month on July 18th. And basically it's gonna contain 4 M2 Max dies put together with multiple versions of their Ultra Fusion connector, at least in my opinion, and it's gonna lead to insane performance. Now, the most interesting part about all of this is that back at Apple's March 8th event, they actually mentioned this. Listen.
Making our transition nearly complete with just one more product to go, Mac Pro.
So Apple themselves at their March event said that they have their Mac Pro coming. Now, I wonder if at that point they plan to scrap it or not, because Mark Gurman did think that the Mac Pro was gonna get revealed at WWDC, but that did not happen, of course, because they scrapped it. Now, here is the big question. Why in the world would Apple scrap their Mac Pro? Because we know that Apple announced a 2-year Apple Silicon transition, and that should have ended, people are arguing, at WWDC with the announcement, or at the very latest, probably November. But because Apple chose to scrap the Mac Pro, they are now going back on their word. Because if you watch the interview with Mark Gurman, he did mention that he thinks they're still gonna announce the Mac Pro later this year, but it's not gonna come out until potentially spring or even summer of next year. So Apple's 2-year transition is technically going out the window. So why in the world would Apple scrap it at the last second? Well, I think I have a pretty good reason. As we all know, at Apple's March event, they revealed their Mac Studio with the new M1 Ultra chip, which basically takes 2 M1 Max dies and puts them together using their Ultra Fusion connector, which basically wires them up. But when we started testing them, specifically testing 2 M1 Ultra models, the 48-core binned model for the GPU and the 64 GPU model, we noticed something really disappointing. The 64-core model was not scaling well at all. It had very bad scaling compared to going from the M1 Max to the M1 Ultra, because technically that's 33% more GPU cores, but here we're only seeing a 16% improvement. And then it got even worse for real-world workloads like classroom cycles GPU rendering in Blender, where we barely got any improvement at all going from the 48 to the 64. And getting even worse, when we tested our Canon 8K to 4K HVC torture test, we had a tiny improvement for those extra cores, which is basically not even worth it at all. But the worst thing was that the GPU actually throttled a lot more on the 64 core down to 752 megahertz. But the crazy thing was that it was not overheating at all. The temps were very cool, sitting at only around 57 degrees Celsius, which means it was not a temperature limit that was throttling the system. It was something else. So we started to ask questions, and we actually had a source reach out to us and confirm that the M1 family of chips had a design limitation, which was a bottleneck in terms of the TLB memory bandwidth, and that led to the scaling being very bad, especially on the M1 Ultra chip. And that actually makes a lot of sense because Apple's marketing showed that the M1 Ultra GPU can go up to 105 watts of power, but the highest we were able to see in any workload was 86 watts, which is completely different than Apple's marketing said it should go up to. And that's why it makes sense that the cooling system was overkill, with us barely seeing any temps being high at all. So when we were doing all this testing and seeing how bad the scaling was on the M1 Ultra Mac Studio, I had a thought where, what if the Mac Pro with the 4-die chip is gonna scale absolutely terribly if the M1 Ultra chip was scaling that bad? And what if that is the reason why Apple decided to scrap it and hold off until the M2 Extreme version? Because our source let us know that Apple was working on fixing that bandwidth limitation that happens when apps are not properly optimized, because most developers were just doing a simple translation to Metal, but they weren't fully optimizing how the GPU uses the memory. And that's why we're getting those scaling problems. So that should be fixed with the M2 Ultra and M2 Extreme, and that is why I think Apple scrapped the M1 family version and they're waiting for the M2 Extreme version. And that's the only reason I can think of for them to scrap it and totally mess their reputation up in terms of this 2-year transition and them not hitting their deadline. But now, with that said, let's pivot over to the second part of this video, which is talking about the new exclusive leaks that we found about the upcoming Mac Pro. And this is going to be very interesting. They actually come from the Mac Rumors forum user Amethyst. Hopefully I'm saying that right. But he ended up leaking some details about the 40-core Apple Silicon Mac Pro that is around the corner, and he posted this on July 12th. Now, before I get into these details, I want to show you guys some reasons why this user is credible. Well, it turns out that on March 3rd, he made a forum post saying that the next workstation class Mac will be called the Mac Studio, and he gave us some interesting info. First of all, he said that it's going to be powered by the M1 Max ×2, which is the M1 Ultra, so he was correct before the Apple event on March 8th. He also said it's going to have 20 CPU cores, 48 GPU cores. He said that there's going to be a low-end Mac display that's going to be launching alongside it, which would be an Apple 5K display. He says he's only seen the front and that it closely resembles what the Apple Pro Display XDR looks like. He hasn't seen the back or the side, so he can't say any of that information. Now, what makes this very interesting is that the very next day, 9to5Mac released an exclusive report saying that the Mac Studio is coming. And I personally believe that their source was literally Amethyst on the Mac Rumors forums, because if you go to his profile, you go to his profile posts, you'll see this little comment from Chance H. Miller saying, "Hi, can you send an email to 9to5mac.com or Signal?" And he says, "Okay, guys." And if you don't know who Chance Miller is, he's actually the lead editor at 9to5Mac, as you can see right here. So I believe their exclusive source was Amethyst. But going back to this post, he actually gave us a lot of very telling and interesting information that also connects with the Mac Pro. First of all, somebody complained saying that, "I really don't think Apple will kill the Mac Pro name. What's your source for this?" And he replied, "From what I know, the Mac Pro name may not be dropped, but we will still get the Mac Studio," which is basically what is happening. Not only that, but he gave some info saying that this is likely not the only configuration in the lineup, saying that we might get other configurations of the Mac Studio as well, which is exactly what we got. And right here he says that he had hands-on with this machine this Monday before the event, saying that it is very fast, which means somehow he was able to get his hands on a prototype machine. And that makes sense because he says he didn't see the hardware itself, but it was in a black cardboard box, kind of like Apple was trying to hide the design from whoever they sent it to. But as far as the box itself, he says that the dimensions of the box look like the G4 Cube. He said he tested it in an office environment and he didn't hear any fans. It was very quiet. And this is actually very interesting because on March 7th, we got some exclusive renders of this new G4 Cube-ish Mac Studio next to an external display from Luke Miani and Ian Zelbo. And of course, Luke showed it off in his video with a bunch of different renders right here, and he got pretty close to the actual design, but he wasn't close. Now, my theory is that Luke Miani found that thread and he decided to create these leaks based on what Amethyst said, saying that it looks like the G4 Cube. But going even further, his source confirmed that the machine has 32 gigs of RAM, and he's saying that we could even see a 128 gigabyte RAM version, which is exactly what we got with the Mac Studio. And not only that, but he says his pal also has info about a high-end iMac, which is interesting, but I'm gonna leave that for another video. But here's where it gets really crazy. Apparently, his pal, who we can't say who his name is, tells him that this system is the third prototype that he got, but this is the first one that was labeled Mac Studio on the About This Mac page, with the previous two just being a black box with the M1 Max system. And apparently he's talking about the software being pretty buggy as well. Now, the interesting part about that is that whoever this source is, they were receiving multiple prototypes, so it makes me think, what if it could be some kind of software developer that Apple sends their prototypes to? Because if you think about it, the only people that'll have access to prototype machines are the people who are testing their software with their new Apple devices. So I have no idea who could it be. I don't want to reveal or anything. I have no idea, but it's likely somebody who receives new prototype machines to test with their software so Apple could create these marketing videos. But here is where the important details about the Mac Pro come in. He says that he had a prototype Mac Pro with an unreleased 38-core chip that he has been testing last year. Now, if you think about that, it points to a 38-core unreleased Intel Xeon that was supposed to ship with a W6800X MPX module, but it looks like Apple likely scrapped that Intel machine. Because earlier this month on July 12th, he put out another forum post saying that a 40-core Apple Silicon Mac Pro is coming around the corner with a PCI Express slot. And in terms of the details, there's 40 cores for the CPU, 32 performance cores, 8 efficiency cores, which perfectly matches up to a quad die chip, and a total of 128 GPU cores, which is exactly what Mark Gurman was saying the Mac Pro would have. Now, there's a chance that he received this prototype and he might receive another one with the new M2 Extreme chip later down the road, or Apple might just plop in that chip when they actually release it. So I likely believe that this guy, whoever he is, has the Mac Pro. And the interesting thing is that it does not have any RAM slots, but it does have a PCI Express slot. He tried to put in an AMD 6900 XT, but it is not working at all, which likely means that Apple is gonna have a custom GPU that goes into that single slot. And in terms of the sample board, stability with macOS is great. And then he came back the next day to brag about him having exclusive info about the Mac Studio and saying that this person lives very far away from him, about 1,000 kilometers away, so he wants to visit his house and check it out. And PS, it contains only one PCI Express slot, so he confirmed it, only one slot. However, his friend did say that he can't confirm what the final configuration is gonna look like or how much PCI Express slots will be in the production unit, but so far, the prototype has only one, saying that this is the first Apple Silicon-based board that he received with a PCI Express slot, which is a sign of the next Mac Pro, because the last Mac Pro prototype he got was Intel-based, that 38-core. So it shows Apple has the Mac Pro done and ready, and people are testing it. And let me remind you, this is on July 13th, which means he received the prototype after WWDC, so Apple is working on that release. So now with that said, I gotta make sense of the single PCI Express slot. Why in the world would that make sense with Apple going from a ton of slots to just one? Well, maybe that's just the test board, maybe they're gonna have more, but what if they only decide to have one PCI Express slot? How would that make sense? Well, first of all, maybe with Apple Silicon, there might be a limitation with the actual number of lanes going out to have extras for the PCI Express slots. Maybe that's why they can only have one. And then another thought is that if they're not gonna support AMD graphics cards, then what's the point of having so many slots? And also, they used to have a slot for the Afterburner card, which used to handle ProRes media encoding and decoding, but their new chips actually have ProRes media engines built in, so there's no need for the Afterburner anymore. And if you think about it, this new M2 Extreme with 4 M2 Max dies is already going to be extremely powerful in terms of the GPU, so I don't think Apple really needs to rely on having that many available slots, potentially to have dual MPX slots, because right now the current Mac Pro with Intel has dual slots for 2 massive MPX modules. However, you could get just a single card with dual GPUs built in, which is actually the better way to go, because the way it works is those dual GPUs are seen as just one GPU to the software, which makes optimization a lot easier and better compared to having 2 different cards that have to work together, and it's just not as efficient as having just a single card with dual GPUs. So what if Apple gives you options for a custom Apple GPU card, both with a single GPU and dual GPU, and that is enough for having external graphics performance as an extra boost if you don't have enough within the actual M2 Extreme chip by itself. And then going even further, if you're somebody who's buying the Mac Pro and you're not doing stuff with graphics, then you can have that extra PCI Express slot to maybe place in some extra server storage, like a RAID setup, just slot it in like Apple sells, or you can put in a different card like an audio management card, or let's say a Blackmagic video controller card, or anything else. You just have one card, and Apple would be able to work with that limitation because they would be able to make the Mac Pro smaller if it only had one PCI Express slot. So in my opinion, this is totally something Apple would do, just give you one slot, or maybe this was just a prototype and the one that we're actually gonna get could have a bunch of slots. Who knows, but I think that source is correct. And then finally, I want to finish off with another reason why I think Apple could have scrapped the M1 family-based Mac Pro and waited for the M2 Extreme, because we did get a report that TSMC was going to start mass production of the new M2 Pro chip on 3 nanometer instead of 5 nanometer. So what if the 5 nanometer model just got way too hot and it wasn't as efficient? They decided to scrap it because it didn't scale that well, and they decided to wait on the 3 nanometer version because they're gonna be able to make that huge package smaller, which is gonna make it easier to cool down, especially since 3 nanometer is more efficient, and they'll basically have a smaller package. So maybe that's why they decided to wait until the M2 Extreme, which is gonna scale better, and it's gonna be an extremely powerful Mac Pro. So let me know what you think about all those thoughts and those leaks down in the comment section below if you disagree with me or you agree. And if you enjoyed the video, click subscribe to help us reach 1 million subscribers. Thank you guys so much. Definitely check out one of those 2 videos right there. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.